We will now continue with the interactive dialogue with the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea. Delegations wishing to inscribe on the speakers list should do so by using the electronic system, which will be opened shortly. It is now my pleasure to welcome to the podium the members of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea. Mr. Mike Smith, Ms. Sheila Keitha-Ruth, Mr. Victor Dankwa. Oh, he's just coming. Very good. But before I give the floor to the chairperson of the Commission of Inquiry, I would like to ask the Secretary to activate the electronic system for your inscription on the list of speakers, and then you'll have 1 minute to inscribe. The provisional list will be shown on the screen shortly. You then have 15 minutes until the list will close. We'll wait for this to end. Right, the provisional list will be shown shortly. Right. And I would now like to invite Mr. Mike Smith, the chairperson of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea, to present an oral update of the Commission pursuant to Council Resolution 26/24 and contained in document A/HRC/resolution/2624. You have 10 minutes and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the Human Rights Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On 27th of June 2014, the Human Rights Council, quote, deeply concerned at the ongoing reports of grave violations of human rights by the Eritrean authorities against their own population, unquote, established the International Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea. Following our appointment by the President of the HRC in September last year, Mr. Dankwa, Ms. Keitha-Ruth and I convened in Geneva in November. We decided to conduct our investigations with a view to identify possible patterns of systematic violations of human rights, make recommendations on how to improve the general human rights situation in the country, and ensure accountability in the future. Through our work, we also aim to increase public awareness of the situation of human rights in the country and provide a historic record of human rights violations. We agreed to focus our attention on violations committed in Eritrea since independence. We also adopted our terms of reference and rules of procedure, methodology and initial program of work, always guided by the principles of independence, impartiality, objectivity, transparency, integrity, confidentiality and the principle of do no harm. Conforming to the practice of other commissions of inquiry, we decided to base our findings on a, quote, reasonable grounds to believe, unquote, standard of proof. The government of Eritrea has so far not cooperated with the Commission and has left unanswered our repeated requests to visit the country and to obtain additional information that would be relevant for its investigation. In line with the established practices applied by other international commissions of inquiry, the Commission is therefore pursuing alternative avenues to obtain direct and first-hand information in a transparent, independent and impartial manner. Ladies and gentlemen, we have had 4 months so far to delve into the human rights situation in Eritrea, and we have done so to an extent never achieved before. We have interviewed approximately 400 people in 5 different countries and received 140 written submissions. We've consulted experts and spoken with a variety of representatives from intergovernmental and non-governmental bodies. While we continue to travel to collect testimonies and to go through information gathered to corroborate individual cases and incidents that will be brought to the attention of the Council in our final report in June, we can already report on very clear patterns of human rights violations and our systemic understanding of them. The dominant dimension of the situation in Eritrea appears to us to be the so-called state of no war, no peace, often referred to by the government of Eritrea. This has become the pretext for almost all the state's actions that generate and perpetuate human rights violations in the country. We are consciously using the word pretext. The so-called no war, no peace situation is indeed not a status recognized under international law. It is an expression abusively used by the Eritrean authorities to disregard international human rights law as if Eritrea was in a legal limbo, while other countries have experienced the uncertainty linked to international conflicts without resorting to such drastic curtailing of freedoms and violations of rights. Under this pretext, the whole society is militarized and national service is universal and of an indefinite duration. Most Eritreans have no hope for their future. National service, whether in a military unit or in a civil assignment, is the only thing that from the age of 17 they can expect to spend their life doing, paid between less than $1 and a maximum of $2 a day. On such wages, they struggle to fulfill their basic needs, let alone think about raising a family. Under this pretext, the Constitution has never been implemented and the National Assembly is not sitting. There is no rule of law in the country and no one is being held accountable for violating the rights of groups or individuals. Under this pretext, the government has curtailed most freedoms from movement to expression, from religion to association. It has created a condition in which individuals feel that they have hardly any choice with regard to the main decisions in their lives: where to live, what career to pursue, when to marry, or who to worship. In order to ensure the enforcement and perpetuation of such a system, pervasive state control and ruthless repression of perceived deviant behaviours, particularly within national service, are crucial. Hence the creation of a network of spies that goes so deep in the fabric of social life that a man employed by national security might not know that his daughter is similarly employed. Hence the extrajudicial executions, enforced disappearances and incommunicado detentions aimed at silencing all perceived critics and teaching a lesson to them and others, because you are never really told why you're arrested, and once you've been arrested, for how long you'll be detained and where. Eritrea is a country where detention is an ordinary fact of life, experienced by an inordinate number of individuals, men and women, old and young, including children, where detention centres are official and unofficial, above ground and underground, metal containers in forbidding heat, or mere fences with no shelter for inmates in punishing cold, where once in one of them there is a likelihood that you will be subject to torture, to extract a confession, or to simply punish behaviours. And what are the behaviours that trigger such punishments? Let me use the words of some of the victims we've interviewed. When you look at them with judging eyes, they punish you. The doctor did not listen to me. The first time I talked to him, he hit me. I again complained. He said, "Go and take a shower. There is no medicine." The guards used to try to have sexual activity with the women there. When we refused them, we were punished simply for refusing. we were forced to roll in the hot sand and lie in the sun. If we did not walk quickly enough during military training, they beat us or shackle us in the Otto position, feet and hands tied behind the back and lying face down, and forced us to stay under the direct sun at midday for 3 hours. I was punished like this because I had drunk water without permission. A peer denounced me to the officers. In return, he was allowed to take a rest. Ladies and gentlemen, is it surprising that faced with such challenges, Eritreans leave their country in their hundreds every day? They brave death to cross borders, deserts and seas, and many of them never make it to the other side. In recent days, the government of Eritrea, the international community, and the United Nations have all sought to address the situation in various ways. We acknowledge the recent cooperation of the state of Eritrea with some human rights mechanisms. We note that Eritrea recently ratified the UN Convention Against Torture. We also take note of the recent announcement made by the government to bring national service back to 18 months for new recruits. We reiterate our interest in receiving further information on this development. We would like to encourage the Eritrean government to consistently follow up on its engagements with real change on the ground. The Commission remains available to visit and is ready to engage in a dialogue with the state of Eritrea. The Commission also takes note of the recent visits made by Member States, UN entities and cooperation agencies to Eritrea. In view of the emerging findings outlined in this oral update, we would like to recall the centrality of human rights when initiating dialogue and cooperation with the Eritrean government. In particular, we should all be reminded that the massive exodus of Eritreans should not, and indeed cannot, be tackled without addressing the human rights situation in the country. I thank you for your attention. I'm ready to provide more detail in response to questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. As it is the practice in our discussions, we shall now... I must say that I think the speakers list is closed now. And as the practice with discussions, we shall start by hearing the delegation of the country concerned. I will now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea. You have 5 minutes.
Mr. President, my delegation once again thanks you for the opportunity accorded to engage with the Human Rights Council. We have listened to the oral report by the COI submitted under Item 4, and Eritrea reiterates its position that country-specific mandate without the consent of the concerned state is counterproductive. Hence, this oral report is rejected, and this statement will thus focus on aspects of reality which require attention of this esteemed Council. At the outset, Eritrea once again clarifies its rational position, which is expressed in the following 3 dimensions. 1, country-specific resolutions and mandates are in breach of the UN principles of impartiality, objectivity and non-selectivity, and hence do not create any dividend in the promotion and protection of human rights. 2, there is no gross and systemic violation of human rights in Eritrea. The presumption under which these mandates have been imposed negate Eritrea's reality and in breach of paragraph 87A of Annex 5/1, and the accusations are politically motivated. 3, Eritrea has ascertained both in commitment and deeds a voracious path of engagement and cooperation with HRC and OHCHR and over bilateral diplomacy. Moreover, my delegation is dismayed that the protracted reliance on unreliable, unproven and sensational information and interaction. Preconceived ideas and conclusions on Eritrea have become rampant. The activist-like approach against Eritrea in contradiction to mandate holders' code of conduct and the reliance of cooperation with Ethiopia and Djibouti as countries with belligerent stance on Eritrea contravening IBP principles is also unacceptable. These have compromised objectivity and should be rejected, as they can be used to mislead the Council. Sir President, with the above dimensions of principle and practice, While the above dimensions of principle and practice are relevant in their own merit, the issue, however, is much deeper. The approach on Eritrea so far has been to disregard the essence of the problems which impinge on Eritrea's sovereignty, the right to development, and the right to live in peace without any threats. This negates the basic HRC principle of the interrelationship of peace and security and human rights and development. On this account, my delegation once again urges the Council to consider Eritrea's situation in the context of the continued occupation of sovereign Eritrean territories, the illegal and unjust sanction imposed on Eritrea, and the belligerent stance and hostility of some countries. Eritrea's resilience has, however, been proven against all the pronounced odds. The modest development progress achieved with sufficient implications to the enjoyment of human rights is an attestation of the real situation in the country, and mention is made of the following. In terms of social justice, equal rights and opportunities sanctioned by national laws continues to uphold human rights obligations. 2. Modest success on the rights of education, food, water, environment, and social security has been made, but effort is still needed to fulfill quality life of our people. 3. The resilience of the economy has been ascertained by modest growth, but efforts are going on to mitigate the challenge of macroeconomic stability and market stabilization affecting the people's living condition. 4. As part of the political process of nation building, the responsible participation of the people, the development of participatory politics, and reorganization to strengthen the government administrative system are some examples taking shape but need expansion and consolidation. 5. The prevailing peace and stability is also a characteristic feature of the nation and is reflected in the harmony, strong social fabrics, and peaceful coexistence of the diverse population with all the rights respected. Mr. President, mainstreaming of human rights in the sustainable development goals of all sectors in nation building has also been strengthened, and recently a strategic framework is being developed towards this end. In this perspective, Eritrea's commitment for expanded and integrated engagement and cooperation paradigm encompassing the following is thus considered as a sustainable path. Engagement and cooperation with the OHCHR has been extended, and already 3 areas have initially been identified. And a recent visit in March 2015 has been made, which will be consolidated in the future once the report is finalized. 2. To maximize the UPR recommendations which Eritrea has accepted as a means of engagement and cooperation, a UPR2 framework of action has been introduced, and a coordination structure is also set up. In this connection, note should be made that Eritrea has already acceded to the Convention Against Torture, Convention on Transnational Organized Crimes, and its protocol to suppress and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. 3. Cooperation with the HRC will further be strengthened, and hence priorities on thematic mandates and treaty bodies have been identified for action. 4. Preliminary discussions have been made to expand our partnership with the UN country team, and action will be initiated by May 2015. 5. Working at bilateral level with missions accredited to Eritrea, including the EU delegation in Eritrea, is also an integral part of the overall effort. In the last 6 months, 2 sessions of dialogue have already been done and will continue on a regular basis. In light of the above position and developments, Mr. President, my delegation would like to seize this opportunity to once again assure my government's commitment to protect and promote human rights for its citizens. In this context, it urges the Council to consider the outlined paths of engagement, cooperation, and institutional links, and avoid the confrontational approach by abandoning the country-specific resolutions and mechanisms imposed on Eritrea. I thank you, Mr. President.
As part of our interactive dialogue, I would now like to countries to take the floor. The first speaker is European Union.
Very much, Mr. President. The European Union warmly thanks the Commission of Inquiry on the situation of human rights in Eritrea for its update and for its excellent work. We deeply regret that the government of Eritrea refuses to cooperate and to grant its access to the country. The European Union welcomed the government of Eritrea's accession to the UN Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment, as well as its recent decision to reduce to 18 months the national military service. We are deeply concerned about persisting serious violations of human rights, such as the arbitrary arrests, including political incommunal detention and inhumane prison conditions, extrajudicial killings, torture, restrictions of fundamental freedoms, particularly freedom of expression, and sexual and gender-based violence. We urge the government of Eritrea to open detention centers to the scrutiny of independent observers, including the High Commissioner for Human Rights. In the regrettable absence of cooperation on behalf of the government of Eritrea, the Commission of Inquiry is collecting information from relevant sources outside the country. We note the Commission's recent visits to 5 countries in Europe and Africa and would be grateful if members of the Commission could elaborate on any particular challenges encountered. We also note that the Commission has scheduled a visit to Sweden and Germany for later this month and would be grateful if the Commission could elaborate on further visits in other states which may be planned. To conclude, we would like to express our full support to the Commission of Inquiry, and we further call on the government of Eritrea to engage in an open and constructive dialogue on the human rights situation in Eritrea. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its update and expresses our continuing support for the Commission's work. We continue to urge the government of the state of Eritrea to take comprehensive steps to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. The United States remains deeply concerned by human rights violations in Eritrea. These concerns include forced participation in the National Service Program beyond the 18-month requirement and in the civilian militia. We are concerned about the severe restrictions on enjoyment of freedom of religion and belief, workers' freedom of association, and other rights. The arbitrary detention of journalists, members of the G15, and others is also deeply troubling. There have been no national elections since 1993. The Council must continue to focus on improving Eritreans' ability to enjoy the rights reflected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We encourage the Eritrean government to cooperate with the international community, including this Commission of Inquiry. This includes allowing the Commission members to visit the country. We also encourage other countries to respond positively to visit requests from the Commission of Inquiry. The people of Eritrea deserve a government that respects and protects the rule of law. They should be able to choose their government through free and fair elections. The United States stands firmly with the Eritrean people in pursuit of these goals. Commissioners, what cooperation from the international community would be most helpful to the Commission of Inquiry in preparing its report? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Norway.
President, we thank the Commission of Inquiry for the oral update regarding the human rights situation in Eritrea. As a long-standing friend of Eritrea and the people of Eritrea, we continue to be gravely concerned about the situation of human rights in the country, as highlighted in the reports by the Special Rapporteur and in the update on the work of the Commission. We believe that Eritrea can benefit greatly from cooperation with the United Nations in general and with the Human Rights Council in particular. And we reiterate our call on the government of Eritrea to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur and the Commission of Inquiry. We would like to ask the Commission a question. What is the status with regard to the duration of the military service in the country? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Venezuela.
Gracias, señor presidente. Como posición de principios, Venezuela no apoya las iniciativas dirigidas específicamente contra los países del sur, y más aún cuando estos mandatos no gozan de la aceptación del Estado concernido. Hemos denunciado que con mandatos como este, presidente, se pretende utilizar los espacios como instrumento contra los países soberanos que para nada contribuyen a mejorar la situación de los derechos humanos en el terreno. Este tipo de iniciativas violan los principios de respeto a la integridad, soberanía y no injerencia en los asuntos internos de los países contenidos en la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Reiteramos una vez más la imperiosa necesidad de que este Consejo cumpla con su mandato de proteger y defender los derechos humanos sobre la base del diálogo genuino y la cooperación, con estricto apego al principio de universalidad y sin apelar a la coacción, los dobles raseros y la politización, mediante la imposición de mandatos específicos contra países. Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you. Next speaker is distinguished delegate from Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Ghana regrets the denied opportunity for the Commission of Inquiry to visit Eritrea to ascertain allegations of human rights violations. That notwithstanding, Ghana welcomes Eritrea's high-level engagement in the review of its human rights record conducted by the Working Group on the Universal Periodic Review in February 2014, and urges her to demonstrate commitment and goodwill towards addressing the human rights violations leveled against her. Eritrea must also endeavor to ratify all the pending human rights conventions and implement them to build upon her capacity with the support of the international community. Mr. President, while Ghana is pleased to note that in 2012, Eritrea requested the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to deploy a high-level mission to the country, Ghana urges the government of Eritrea to continue to work and cooperate fully with the Human Rights Council and the Special Rapporteur to ascertain the human rights situation in the country. We emphasize our belief that no country is perfect with the human rights obligations. However, all countries are obliged to demonstrate her commitment to improve upon her capacity to address any identified challenges and to uphold all the human rights and dignity of her people without exception. Ghana calls on Eritrea to take steps to ratify the Convention Against Torture and its optional protocol, to demonstrate its commitment to ratify and implement the Convention. Ghana calls on Eritrea to join the Group of Friends on the Convention Against Torture initiative, to share the country's experiences and to learn from the experiences of others. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call the distinguished delegate from Czech Republic to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Czech Republic supports the statement delivered by the European Union. We thank the members of the Commission of Inquiry for their oral updates. We regret that the requests of the Commission for the cooperation of the government of Eritrea have not received response, and that members of the Commission did not have the opportunity to visit the country. We therefore appreciate the decision of victims and witnesses of alleged human rights violations who had to leave their country to testify and to bring the human rights situation in Eritrea to the attention of the international community. We regret the lack of improvement and continuing massive violations of human rights, which include enforced disappearances, arbitrary arrests and detentions. On the other hand, we welcome Eritrea's accession to the Convention Against Torture in September 2014, and we call on the government to implement it and to ratify its optional protocol. The ineffective implementation of the 1997 Constitution and the suspension of the National Assembly have resulted in a deterioration of the rule of law. We therefore call on the government to expeditiously hold free and fair elections to the National Assembly and other elected bodies, to ensure the implementation of the Constitution and to expedite its planned review process. The indefinite national service, which has contributed to a serious refugee crisis, must be discontinued. We look forward to a written report and Commission's recommendations that will be presented to the Council at its session in June, and would like to hear how can we, the states, be more helpful and supportive to the Commission's difficult task. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is distinguished delegate from Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation has carefully listened to the oral update. We took note of it and had the pleasure to make the following remarks. It's indeed a fact that the promotion and protection of human rights is the primary responsibility of states towards its individuals. However, regional and international assistance and cooperation based on constructive dialogue, mutual understanding, and partnership cannot be neglected. We strongly believe that the success of special procedure mechanisms in particular country mandates require the full consent of the consent country and a high degree of cooperation between the mandate holder and the state in question. Sudan remains confident that the full respect of the principles of work in this Council, the impartiality, non-selectivity, non-politicization and transparency are indispensable in preserving the effectiveness of the role of our August Council. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Je donne la parole au délégué distingué de la France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La France s'associe à la déclaration prononcée par l'Union européenne. Nous remercions la commission d'enquête pour le travail qu'elle a déjà effectué et pour sa présentation orale qui permet de faire utilement le point sur la mise en œuvre de son mandat. La France déplore l'absence de coopération des autorités érythréennes avec la Commission, qui gâche ainsi l'opportunité d'échange et d'explication que celle-ci représente. Ceci est d'autant plus regrettable que la situation des droits de l'homme et des libertés fondamentales en Érythrée demeure particulièrement préoccupante. Nous déplorons la persistance de violations généralisées des droits civils et politiques, en particulier les restrictions massives des libertés fondamentales d'expression et d'association, les détentions arbitraires, ainsi que la pratique de la torture. La France encourage à cet égard les autorités érythréennes à mettre en œuvre pleinement les dispositions de la Convention des Nations Unies contre la torture que l'Érythrée a récemment ratifiée. Si des progrès ont été enregistrés en matière de santé maternelle et infantile et en matière de lutte contre le VIH et la malaria, la situation des droits économiques et sociaux en Érythrée demeure globalement particulièrement précaire. Le nombre croissant d'Érythréens fuyant le pays au péril de leur intégrité physique ou de leur vie témoigne également de la nécessité d'une amélioration de la situation des droits de l'homme en Érythrée. Monsieur le Président de la Commission d'enquête, estimez-vous qu'en dépit de l'absence de coopération des autorités érythréennes, les visites dans les pays voisins, ainsi que les recherches et les entretiens que vous avez pu mener, vous permettront d'établir un rapport reflétant la situation en Érythrée de façon aussi précise et complète que possible? Monsieur le Président, la France réitère son soutien au mandat de la commission d'enquête. Elle sera très attentive aux conclusions du rapport que la Commission présentera en juin prochain, ainsi qu'aux suites qui pourront lui être données pour permettre une véritable amélioration de la situation des droits de l'homme en Érythrée. La France exhorte à nouveau les autorités érythréennes à coopérer pleinement avec la commission d'enquête en lui autorisant l'accès à son territoire et en acceptant d'engager le dialogue. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. The next speaker is a distinguished delegate from Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Australia would like to join others in thanking the Chairman of the Commission of Inquiry for his sobering oral update and to thank the Commission for its excellent work. Let me also say that we share the disappointment of the Commission that it hasn't been permitted to visit Eritrea and that the cooperation of the authorities in Eritrea has not been forthcoming. Let me say we'd like to encourage Eritrea to implement fully its 1997 constitution and the rights that it enshrines, including allowing independent political parties and non-government organisations to function freely and to allow citizens to choose their government at the ballot box. In this connection, I'd be interested in the Chairman's views on his comment about the state of no war, no peace being a fundamental obstacle to progress on human rights. Let me also say that Australia remains deeply concerned by the systematic human rights violations outlined in his oral update, including extrajudicial killing, torture and other challenges in relation to conditions of detention. We're also concerned, like other delegations, about compulsory military service and the reported use of conscripts for forced labour, and by reports of reprisals against family members of people who evade military services. We're also concerned about efforts by the government in Eritrea to impose a tax on the Eritrean diaspora, particularly measures to collect such a tax by way of extortion, threats of violence, fraud and other illicit means. In conclusion, let me say, Mr. President, that we'd like to urge Eritrea to engage with the Commission of Inquiry, which we fully support, and to allow it access to Eritrea in order to fulfil the mandate given to it by the Human Rights Council. Australia urges Eritrea to comply with Resolution 2624 in order to arrive at long-lasting, problem-solving human rights solutions that comply with international standards. I thank you, sir.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Germany. Sie haben das Wort.
Thank you, Mr. President. Germany aligns itself with the statement on behalf of the European Union. We would like to thank the Commission of Inquiry on Eritrea for its update on the human rights situation in the country. We have followed the oral presentation with great interest and are looking forward to the presentation of the report and recommendations in June. Germany continues to be deeply concerned by reports about ongoing human rights violations in Eritrea. We welcome first steps taken, such as the accession to the UN Convention Against Torture, and call for its prompt implementation by the authorities. At the same time, every effort must be made to end human rights violations, including in the judiciary, such as arbitrary arrests and inhuman detention conditions, as well as those linked to the national military service. We call once again on the government of Eritrea to respect, protect and promote human rights of all persons without exception. In this regard, we regret that the government of Eritrea has shown no interest in cooperating with the Commission and has even hindered its work by not granting access to the country. We encourage the government of Eritrea to change this and fully cooperate with the Commission, as well as to take its recommendations into account and implement them in a timely manner. Since the Commission was not able to visit the country to analyze the situation in Eritrea, it is of even greater importance to find other ways of fulfilling its mandate. One substitute is visits to countries where Eritrean refugees and migrants have found a new home in order to collect first-hand testimonies and reports from the Eritrean diaspora. The Commission has already visited 5 European and African countries and collected reports from more than 400 Eritrean refugees in the past month, who have proven to be a valuable source of information regarding the human rights situation in Eritrea. Therefore, we very much welcome the Commission's visit to Germany from 18-19 March this year and declare our full support. Since the Eritrean community in Germany is sizable, we hope that this visit will contribute to the Commission's work. We would be grateful if the Commission could give us an outlook on its plans for the upcoming months. Since no visit to Eritrea has been possible so far, how does the Commission envision the follow-up and which steps could be taken by the international community to take adequately account of the worrying human rights situation in Eritrea? At this point, Germany would like to reiterate its full support for the Commission of Inquiry on Eritrea and commend it once again on its excellent work. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Djibouti.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, Djibouti would like to express its deepest appreciation to the Commission of Inquiry on the human rights situation in Eritrea for its oral update. We would like to commend the tremendous work achieved since its establishment and the seriousness of purpose with which the Commission has implemented its mandate. Members of the Council unanimously decided to appoint the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Situation in Eritrea and subsequently established the Commission of Inquiry during its 26th session in June 2014 in light of the continued reports of a systematic pattern of gross, grave and serious human rights violations in the country. The expectations of this Council are high. We are convinced that it would play a catalytic role in bringing about a dramatic change in the human rights situation in the country and ensure accountability in the future. We therefore deplore the fact that the government of Eritrea continues to hinder the important work of the Commission by not cooperating, as it has to date offered no response to the request to visit the country. Djibouti was pleased to facilitate the mission in Djibouti of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea to collect information, testimonies and accounts from victims and witnesses. We in Djibouti remain deeply concerned by the plight of Djibouti prisoners of war detained incommunicado in Eritrea. You had the opportunity to meet and interview the 2 Djibouti prisoners of war who were fortunate enough to escape with the assistance of Eritrean people after 3 years of detention. We are looking forward to the written report that would contain its findings and recommendations to the Human Rights Council in June 2015. Djibouti finally expresses hope that by then it would be in a position to provide detailed information on the whereabouts and the health of the Djibouti prisoners of war. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished speaker from Ireland to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ireland welcomes the establishment of a Commission of Inquiry on Eritrea and the extension of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. Ireland would like to make the following remarks in addition to those made in the EU intervention on our behalf. Ireland welcomes Eritrea's accession to the UN Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment in September 2014. We also welcome Eritrea's recent decision to reduce the national military service to 18 months. However, Ireland remains deeply concerned about the human rights situation in Eritrea. We call on Eritrea to implement the recommendations accepted during its Universal Periodic Review in February 2014. We are concerned that the constitution adopted in 1997 has not yet been implemented and that elections have not been held since 1993. Ireland believes that gender-based violence is a major abuse of human rights which can have serious impacts on women's health, well-being and livelihoods. We therefore welcome the decision of the Commission of Inquiry to investigate discrimination against women and sexual and gender-based violence, among other human rights issues. Ireland would like to ask the Commission of Inquiry its assessment of the treatment of women and children in national service and in detention in Eritrea. Ireland would also appreciate the Commission's views around efforts towards the eradication of female genital mutilation in Eritrea. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from China to take the floor.
主席先生，中国代表团注意到厄立特里亚人权状况国际调查委员会所作口头报告。中方在国别人权问题上的立场是明确的，一贯主张通过建设性对话与合作处理人权领域的分歧，反对在人权领域公开施压，认为强加外部调查机制无助于解决问题。国别人权审查机制是讨论国别人权问题的合适场所。中方注意到，在过去1年里，厄立特里亚建设性参与第2轮国别人权审查工作，并承诺积极落实在审查中接受的建议。中方欢迎厄立特里亚在促进和保护人权方面所做的努力，希望国际社会客观看待并充分理解厄立特里亚作为发展中国家在促进和保护人权方面面临的困难和挑战。鼓励人权高专办、特别机制等在与厄立特里亚政府充分协商的基础上，向其提供建设性帮助。谢谢主席先生。
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Switzerland to take the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La Suisse remercie les membres de la commission d'enquête sur l'Érythrée pour leur rapport oral. Nous restons particulièrement préoccupés par les exécutions extrajudiciaires, les disparitions forcées, le service national de durée indéfinie, le travail forcé ainsi que par les restrictions incompatibles avec le droit à la liberté d'expression, y compris la liberté de la presse, d'association et de réunion pacifique qui prévalent en Érythrée. La Suisse a soutenu en juin 2014 la création de la commission d'enquête qui a comme mandat d'enquêter sur toutes les violations présumées des droits de l'homme en Érythrée mises en évidence dans les rapports de la rapporteure spéciale. Nous sommes convaincus qu'il est fondamental pour une paix durable de traduire en justice les auteurs de violations des droits de l'homme. Ceci relève principalement de la responsabilité du gouvernement de l'Érythrée. La commission d'enquête sur l'Érythrée a l'expertise et le mandat nécessaires afin de soutenir ce processus. Par conséquent, rappelons aux pays concernés, tout d'abord à l'Érythrée, que la coopération avec la commission d'enquête a non seulement été ainsi décidée par la communauté internationale, mais est bénéfique à tous les États impliqués. C'est dans ce contexte que la Suisse déplore le refus de l'Érythrée de laisser les membres de la commission d'enquête accéder aux paix. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Next speaker is the delegate from the UK.
Thank you, Mr. President. The UK supports the EU statement. The UK would like to thank the Commission of Inquiry on Eritrea for its update and its continuing work. We regret that the government of Eritrea continues to refuse to grant access to Eritrea. The UK shares the Commissioner's concerns highlighted in its last report on national military service, arbitrary arrest and detention, including incommunicado detention and inhumane prison conditions. The UK welcomes and supports the recommendations made by the Special Rapporteur, and we look forward to the next report in June 2015. We would be interested to hear the Commissioner's views on recent steps taken by Eritrea in ratifying the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment, and Eritrea's vote in favour of a global moratorium on the death penalty at the UN General Assembly in November 2014. The UK expresses its disappointment that Eritrea continues to reject the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Eritrea and to deny the Commission all access and cooperation. This imposes an additional unnecessary burden to collate evidence inside Eritrea. We call on the government of Eritrea to honour its commitment to international human rights obligations and to cooperate fully with the whole UN human rights system, including the Special Rapporteur and the Commission of Inquiry. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. We would now turn to the list of NGOs. The first speaker is International Fellowship of Reconciliation. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The International Fellowship of Reconciliation, together with Human Rights Concern Eritrea, thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its update and for its commitment to bring the human rights tragedy in Eritrea to the Council's attention. We strongly supported the creation of the COI, having reached the sad conclusion that the Eritrean government showed no interest in combating the gross and systematic human rights violations perpetrated within its borders. We reluctantly argued that sustained international exposure through a COI mechanism was the only means of calling those responsible to account for their abuses and giving a voice to those suffering largely in silence. It is noteworthy that the establishment of the COI was a consensus decision of this Council, appropriately reflecting the gravity of the situation and the urgent need for action. Since the creation of the mandate last year, we have seen no improvement on the ground. Stories of widespread human rights violations continue to emerge. Of particular concern is the forced military training in harsh environments of senior citizens up to the age of 84, including the disabled. That has resulted in the deaths of at least 6 people, and the demolition of hundreds of homes in several localities that have left families without shelter. In addition, up to 7,000 people are fleeing the country on a monthly basis. We therefore urge the Council, together with the Office of the High Commissioner, to ensure the Commission continues to receive the support and access it needs to complete its work. Mr. President, we reiterate our call to Member States, particularly those in the region, to do all that they can to assist the Commission in conducting its work, including providing access to Eritrean diaspora communities. We also call in advance on the Council to do all it can to honour and implement the recommendation the COI will make when it delivers its final report in June. In this way, we may finally provide some justice to the Eritreans we are all mandated
we have to move
speak
on
up
to the
for
next
and
speaker,
protect. Thank you.
which is Human Rights Watch. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Human Rights Watch welcomes the Commission of Inquiry's interim assessment, which shows that this is essential for Eritrea to remain on the Human Rights Council's agenda. We regret that the government has so far refused to provide access to the Commission. This is also telling. It suggests that the government fears the scrutiny of its human rights record. The Commission had necessarily turned to recent victims of the Eritrean human rights abuses, men, women, and unaccompanied children who have fled the country in recent years. They are the best available witnesses about current practices. The Eritrean government asserts that the human rights situation in the country is improving, but there is no credible evidence to support such a conclusion. Relevant benchmarks for progress on Eritrea's human rights record would include state commitment to respect its international human rights obligations, including cooperation with the Commission and the Special Rapporteur, the release of prisoners detained on political grounds, including journalists and government officials jailed without trial since 2001, the lifting of restrictions on independent medias, NGOs and unorganized religions, and an end to indefinite military service and the adoption of OPCAT. There is no indication of progress on any of those points. The rumour that national service conscripts who had served longer than the statutory permissible 18 months had been demobilized has not been confirmed. On the contrary, even Eritreans who have aged out of national service, 60 or 70-year-olds, must now provide uncompensated service in the militia several times a week. There is still a window for Eritrea to change course and support the Commission's work. We urge all governments, particularly nearby African countries hosting refugees such as Uganda, Kenya, Sudan, as well as UN agencies to support and cooperate with the Commission. Finally, we urge host countries for Eritrean refugees to fully assist and protect them. Absent such protection, Eritreans will continue to travel to the EU and face the risk of falling into the hands of abusing smugglers and dangerous journey across the Mediterranean Sea. We call on EU member states to ensure Eritreans continue to have full access to fair and efficient asylum procedures on EU territory and to increase search and rescue operations at sea to help prevent loss of life.
We would now go on to the next speaker, which is Article 19, the International Center Against Censorship.
Mr. President, Article 19 welcomes the oral update by the Commission of Inquiry on the human rights situation in Eritrea. The Commission of Inquiry is a necessary mechanism for this Council, given the gross and systematic human rights violations in Eritrea committed with impunity, including in respect of the right to freedom of expression. Article 19 observes that the Eritrean government continues to rely on a perpetual state of emergency to prohibit any criticism and wipe out independent voices. No private media have existed in Eritrea since the last 8 private newspapers were forced to close in 2001, when at least 18 journalists and 11 former government officials were arrested. A total of 69 journalists have been detained without charge or fair trial for exercising their right to freedom of expression since 2001. While 8 journalists are reported to have died in detention, a wall of silence means it is impossible to know how many others remain in prison, where they are detained, or information about their well-being. The few remaining media in Eritrea are state-owned and serve as a mouthpiece for the Ministry of Information. Alternative sources of news are largely non-existent due to an extremely low internet penetration level of around 6%. Eritrea's sole telecommunications provider is government-controlled, and online news sources are routinely blocked, leaving the people with no alternative media. Eritrea's legal framework, together with a complete absence of credible or functioning public institutions or an independent judiciary, sustains impunity for human rights violations and prevents the opening of civil society space. Domestic laws are engineered to grant the regime the discretionary means to crush any hint of dissent, and the judiciary are entirely complicit in this. Article 19 calls on all states to be unequivocal in urging Eritrea to fully cooperate with the Commission of Inquiry and facilitate unhindered access to the country, including for journalists and opposition activists that remain in detention, and their release must be insisted upon. Revealing the full extent of gross and systematic human rights violations in the country must be the basis for international action to ensure accountability, with the end goal of securing institutional and legal reforms in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. The last speaker is Amnesty International.
Thank you, Mr. President. Human rights continue to be systematically violated in Eritrea. Thousands of individuals are arbitrarily detained in harsh conditions without charge or trial. For exercising their rights to freedom of opinion and expression, and to freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief. For attempting to flee repression or in the place of family members who have fled. National service is compulsory and frequently extended for indefinite periods. This amounts to forced labor, as both the Special Rapporteur on Eritrea and most recently the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women have recognized. Torture and other ill treatment are widespread, in violation of Eritrea's human rights obligation, including under the Convention Against Torture. In the face of such repression, thousands of Eritreans continue to flee their country. Last year,
Thank you.
Last year, UNHCR reported a dramatic increase in the numbers of Eritrean refugees and asylum seekers in Sudan, Ethiopia and Europe. The state must continue to provide protection to those fleeing Eritrea and ensure that the principle of non-refoulement is respected. Asylum seekers forcibly returned to Eritrea have been arbitrarily arrested, detained without charge and subjected to torture and ill treatment. According to testimonies received by Amnesty International, Mr. President, restrictions on the exchange of information and the risk of reprisals against those critical of the government make it extremely difficult for individuals to speak out about their experiences in Eritrea. The Commission of Inquiry has an important opportunity not only to bring to light the stories of victims of human rights violation in the country, but also to lay groundwork for justice, truth and reparation, including guarantees of non-recurrence. We look forward to the Commission of Inquiry's report later this year and encourage the Commission to propose follow-up measures to the recommendation in that report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. This brings us to the end of the speakers list. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Mike Smith for his final remarks. No, the country concerned, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm absolutely sorry. The country concerned has 2 minutes. Eritrea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank those countries who tried to put the issue into the context of the prevailing situation and the deviations of the Council from the established principles of objectivity, non-selectivity and impartiality. As far as the engagement and cooperation is concerned, we have outlined the engagement and cooperation paradigm containing 4 pillars, and the recent visit by the Human Rights Commission Office and the identification of some priorities is one step forward, while the other steps are following. As far as the various allegations and accusations is concerned, we have given enough deliberation on all these issues in all sessions and in all statements of the government. Yes, there are challenges and problems of human rights in Eritrea like in any other country, but again, we reiterate our position that there is no gross and systematic human rights violations in Eritrea. If we turn to the issue of the National Service, the National Service and the sensational exploitation to the issue of mass exodus and the fate that they face in their journey to destination countries has been raised. It must be noted that the working youth generation of the society have been the target of a strong external pull factor. The preferential treatment of Eritreans by Western countries is also a grave issue in this respect. The government works earnestly to curb this phenomena by addressing the root causes, including through international cooperation. Our commitment to bring the perpetrators of human trafficking to justice is also ongoing. But as far as the National Service is concerned, it's not indefinite. But yes, there has been an extended period over the 18 years due to the prevailing environment of security in the country. But note should be made that continuous efforts have been going on to mitigate this challenge of the extended period. But the fact that the COI again raised the issue of the continued occupation of sovereign Eritrean territory as an excuse by the government is unacceptable. We completely oppose such type of position as it undermines the right to sovereignty, the right to development, and the right to live in peace without any threats for the Eritrean people. The issue of the constitution has been raised repeatedly, and we have dealt with this over and over again in different sessions. But to make note that a new body has been established to write a new constitution, and the activities have already started, and this is one of the recent developments in the country, along the finalization of the national laws which are ready for proclamation. And this, in the above perspective, it doesn't go without saying that the Council has not addressed our concerns particularly.
Kindly come to a close for reasons of equal treatment of countries concerned.
Okay. Just, if I could finish this point.
Okay, finish the sentence.
In this perspective, it doesn't go without saying that the Council has not addressed our concern, particularly in the accreditation of NGOs and the deviation thereof. Some NGOs continue to abuse this forum in their ECOSOC status by representing people with a political opinion and even criminals in breach of the heavy responsibility they are entrusted with. This unwarranted practice was the object of objected by many delegates by way of points of order, and we believe should have been addressed by now. In our case, we have witnessed human traffickers and anti-Eritrea elements availing themselves of this forum for their criminal objectives and political ends due to not addressing the issue. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to the Special Rapporteur, Mr. Mike Smith, for his concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. There are a number of questions. First of all, can I thank everyone who has spoken in this interactive dialogue. The Commissioners all appreciate very much the feedback that we've heard and the questions that have been posed. There are quite a significant number of questions that have been put up. We will do our best to respond within the time to some of these. Others, though, will be dealt with in any case in our final report. Necessarily, in this oral update, we haven't gone into detail in many of the areas of concerns that we have, and similarly, we won't be able to say very much in this brief discussion. There were several questions that related to the particular challenges that the Commission has faced in visiting countries. I would say that, that at the outset we wrote to a large number of countries, I think about 25, where there are significant populations of Eritreans in the diaspora. The reason for this was that without access to the country concerned, Eritrea, our best hope of actually finding out what was happening was to talk to people and hear their personal stories, not their views, but their personal stories of what has happened to them. And when we put all of those personal stories together, we get a picture of what's happening in the country. Now, of the 25-odd countries that we wrote to, we've actually received agreement to visit from about 12. We therefore urge those who haven't responded to reconsider, and those who can, to indicate that they will be prepared to receive a visit. We still have time to make a couple of visits in the next few weeks before we have to finalize our report. One question related to whether what would be the most helpful thing for countries to offer us in preparing this report. That would be it, to give us access. There was a question about the duration of military service. There have been a few questions raised about that. We've heard a response from the ambassador from Eritrea. At the moment, we have heard nothing from people that we have spoken to, including some who have actually left the country very recently, like in February, to indicate that there's been any change on the ground in this respect. We note, however, that there has been high-level confirmation that there is move to do this, and we would be, frankly, extremely welcoming if this move were to actually take effect, because it's our view that this indefinite military service and national service on virtually starvation wages is at the root of a great many of the human rights problems in the country. But we still wait to see that there is some confirmation that this has happened. Can we produce a report without the cooperation of Eritrea? Yes, we can. We know that, and many other commissions of inquiry have done that. We believe that we can produce a very credible report. At the same time, we would very much like to have the cooperation of Eritrea to visit the country, to visit the places that we've heard a lot about, and talk to people on the ground. We would certainly think that would enhance our report. In terms of the plans for the upcoming month, we are visiting 3 more countries in the next 2 weeks, notably Sweden, Germany and the United States. And we still have the possibility of visiting 1 or 2 countries in April, and again I urge those countries we've written to, particularly those that are neighbours of Eritrea, to agree to our visiting. There is a question about the treatment of women and children in national service and in detention in Eritrea. There is no question in our view that women particularly, and children, are most deeply affected, are more deeply affected in general than males who are in these situations. Particularly the women in national service, well, in both places they suffer a great deal, and the women in the society at large suffer because of the number of men who are in detention or who are in national service and unable to support their families. There was a question about female genital mutilation, which I think maybe the Special Rapporteur can add some more information to. One final question related to contact with Eritrean missions on our visits. Everywhere we've gone to, we have sought to meet with Eritrean officials, but to this stage, other than a meeting very early on at the permanent mission here in Geneva, we have not had any contact. Can I ask perhaps Sheila Kitaruth if she would like to add anything to this summary? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Just to say that with regards to FGM, Eritrea should be commended for the proclamation of number 158, 2007, abolishing FGM. However, one of the issues which remain is that the figures with regards to the practice are still quite high. And the point is that with regards to having the law, there needs to be other measures to reinforce the enforcement and also to ensure that the awareness campaigns and others. This question has been dealt with recently at length before the CEDAW committee. Thank you. And it's in its recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of the interactive dialogue. I would like to thank the chairman of the Commission, but also the other members, including the Special Rapporteur, who is also part of the Commission. And we're looking forward to the written report in June. It also brings us to the end of the meeting. We will reconvene after a technical break of 5 minutes to begin the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. I hereby declare closed the 30th meeting of the 28th session of the Human Rights Council.